The CEO's Maserati was engulfed in flames when Ethan Cole ripped open the door, his callous janitor hands burning against the metal. Clara Hayes sat inside, blood trickling down her face, her designer suit smoldering. As he dragged her to safety, she grabbed his torn shirt and whispered something that made his blood run cold. Not thank you, but 5 words that would change everything. I know who you are. Welcome to a story where heroes wear janitor uniforms and CEOs learn that salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The warehouse district of Chicago sprawled beneath a gray October sky, its industrial bones exposed like the ribs of some vast sleeping giant. Ethan Cole pushed his mop bucket across the polished floor of Building 7, the wheels squeaking in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to his nights. At 34, he had the kind of face that made people look twice, not because he was handsome in any conventional way, but because his eyes held stories that most people spent lifetimes trying to forget. Daddy's working late again. 7-year-old Sophie had said that morning, her small fingers tracing the dark circles under his eyes. She'd tried to make him breakfast burnt toast and orange juice that was mostly pulp, and he'd eaten every bite as if it were a feast prepared by angels. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ethan worked, casting harsh shadows that made everything look older, more tired. His phone-cracked screen held together with clear tape vibrated against his hip. The wallpaper showed Sophie's gap-toothed grin from her school picture day. The one where she'd insisted on wearing her mother's necklace, the only thing Sarah had left behind when cancer took her 2 years ago. Cole, the voice cracked like a whip across the empty warehouse floor. Marcus Thompson, the night supervisor, stood near the loading dock, his considerable bulk straining against his uniform. You planning on finishing this century? I got 3 more buildings need doing before dawn. Ethan didn't look up, just kept pushing the mop in steady arcs. I'll get to them, Marcus. You better. And don't forget to lock up when you're done. Last thing I need is corporate breathing down my neck about security. Marcus disappeared into his office, the door slamming with enough force to echo through the cavernous space. Alone again, Ethan allowed himself a moment to lean against the mop handle. His back screamed from the 12-hour shift he'd already pulled, but rent was due in 3 days. Sophie needed new shoes for gym class, and the electricity company had sent their second notice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper worn soft from handling. Tomorrow's job interview at Morrison Tech, assistant maintenance supervisor. It wasn't much, but it paid $8 more an hour and had health insurance that actually covered something. He'd circled the interview time in red 9:00 a.m. sharp. He'd have to leave straight from his shift, no time to go home and change. The suit he'd bought from Goodwill hung in his locker, still in its dry cleaning bag. It was 2 sizes too big, but Sophie had helped him pin it in the right places. You look like a businessman, Daddy, she'd said, her face serious as she stuck pins in the jacket. Like the people on TV who have offices with windows. The memory made him smile, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. He returned to his work with renewed energy, finishing Building 7 in record time. As he loaded his supplies into the janitor's cart, his eyes caught something unusual in the corner, a notebook, leather-bound and expensive-looking, half-hidden behind a stack of shipping pallets. Ethan picked it up, flipping through pages covered in technical drawings and equations. Someone from the day shift must have dropped it. He tucked it into his cart, making a mental note to turn it in to Lost and Found. As he pushed toward the exit, he paused at a window overlooking the production floor below. Rows of sophisticated machinery sat silent in the darkness, their chrome surfaces reflecting the emergency lighting like sleeping dragons. One machine, larger than the others, had a panel hanging open. Even from this distance, Ethan could see the tangle of wires inside, some of them clearly disconnected. He'd seen the day shift engineers working on it for weeks, their frustration evident in the way they'd slam their toolboxes and shake their heads. The company Caldwell Innovations was supposedly unveiling some revolutionary new product next month. This must be the prototype. Ethan found himself walking down the stairs, drawn by a curiosity he couldn't quite explain. The production floor was off-limits to cleaning staff, but something about those dangling wires called to him. He'd always been good with his hands, had a way of seeing how things fit together. Before Sarah got sick, he'd been halfway through an engineering degree, top of his class at community college. But medical bills had a way of rewriting life stories. Standing before the massive machine, Ethan set down his mop bucket and really looked at the exposed circuitry. The problem was obvious to him, a simple case of overthinking. The engineers had bypassed the main conductor, creating a feedback loop that would overload the system every time. All it needed was, "What the hell are you doing?" Ethan spun around to find a security guard standing 10 feet away, flashlight trained on his face. It was Jerry, one of the newer guys eager to prove himself. "Just cleaning," Ethan said, raising his hand slightly. Notice the panel was open. "This area is restricted, you know that." Jerry's hand moved to his radio. "I should report this." "Come on, Jerry, I'm just doing my job. You know me, I've been here 3 years, never caused any trouble." Jerry hesitated, then lowered his radio. "Get out of here, Cole, and stick to your assigned areas." Ethan nodded, grabbing his bucket and heading for the exit. As he walked away, he couldn't shake the image of those wires, the elegant solution that had formed in his mind. But it wasn't his problem. He was a janitor, not an engineer, not anymore. The drive to Building 8 took him past the nice part of town where the buildings had doormen and the cars in the parking garages cost more than he'd make in 5 years. Sophie always pressed her face against the window when they drove through here, making up stories about the people who lived in the penthouses. "That one's a princess," she'd say, pointing at a lit window. "And she has a horse that lives on the roof." Building 8 was smaller, an overflow warehouse that Caldwell used for storing old equipment. It took him 2 hours to clean his movements automatic after years of practice. By the time he finished, it was nearly 5 a.m. He had just enough time to grab coffee and a shower at the truck stop before heading to his interview. The truck stop shower cost $8 money he couldn't really spare, but showing up to an interview smelling like industrial disinfectant wouldn't make the best impression. He stood under the weak spray of hot water, letting it ease the knots in his shoulders. In the cracked mirror, he practiced his smile, the one that said reliable employee rather than desperate single father. The suit felt strange after months of wearing nothing but his janitor's uniform. Sophie's pins held surprisingly well, making it look almost tailored. He'd watch YouTube videos on how to tie a tie, practicing with Sophie as his audience. She'd clapped when he finally got it right, her faith in him absolute and terrifying in its intensity. The highway was already filling with morning commuters as Ethan merged into traffic. His 1998 Honda Civic, held together by rust and prayer, struggled to keep up with the flow. The check engine light had been on for 6 months, but as long as the engine actually ran, he chose to ignore it. Sophie called it lightning because of the faded racing stripe someone had inexpertly painted on the hood. Traffic slowed to a crawl near the I-90 interchange, and Ethan checked his watch anxiously. 8:15. Still plenty of time if traffic started moving soon. He turned on the radio, finding the classical station Sophie liked. She said it helped her think better when she did her homework. At 7, she was already reading 2 grades above her level, her teacher constantly sending home notes about what a bright child she was. She could go far with the right opportunities, Mrs. Peterson had written in the last one. The words had kept Ethan awake that night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how he could give his daughter those opportunities when he could barely keep the lights on. The traffic started moving again, and Ethan allowed himself to imagine getting the job. The extra money would mean Sophie could join the after-school science club she'd been talking about. Maybe they could even move to a better neighborhood, one where he didn't have to check the locks 3 times before bed. That's when he saw the smoke. Black and thick it rose from a car about 100 yards ahead, pulled over on the shoulder. Other vehicles were passing by, drivers craning their necks to look, but not stopping. Ethan could see flames licking at the hood of what looked like a silver Maserati, the kind of car that costs more than most people's houses. He should keep driving. The interview was in 35 minutes, and stopping would mean being late. Someone else would help. Someone always did. But as he got closer, he could see a figure inside the car slumped against the window. The flames were spreading, consuming the front of the vehicle with frightening speed. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, yanking the wheel to the right and pulling onto the shoulder. He was out of his car before it had fully stopped running toward the burning Maserati. The heat hit him like a physical wall, making him stumble. Through the smoke-darkened window, he could see a woman unconscious or dazed, blood on her forehead. The door handle was hot enough to burn, but Ethan grabbed it anyway, yanking with all his strength. It wouldn't budge. The flames were spreading along the undercarriage now, and he could smell gasoline. He looked around frantically, spotting a large rock on the shoulder. Without thinking, he grabbed it and slammed it against the window. The safety glass spiderwebbed but didn't break. "Come on." He hit it again, harder this time, and the window finally shattered. Reaching through, ignoring the glass that cut into his arms, he unlocked the door from the inside and pulled it open. The woman was semi-conscious, her eyes unfocused. She was wearing a business suit that probably cost more than his car, her dark hair perfectly styled despite the chaos. As Ethan reached for her seatbelt, her hand grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "The briefcase," she mumbled. Words slurred. "Need the briefcase." "Lady, we need to get out now." The flames were inside the car, now eating at the dashboard, but she kept pointing at a leather briefcase in the back seat. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, Ethan grabbed it, then hauled the woman out of the car, half carrying, half dragging her away from the vehicle. They'd made it maybe 20 feet when the Maserati exploded. The force knocked them both to the ground, Ethan instinctively covering the woman with his body as debris rained down. His suit jacket caught fire from a piece of burning plastic, and he rolled frantically to put it out, the fabric smoking and ruined. When the ringing in his ears subsided, he became aware of sirens approaching. The woman was trying to sit up at her movements, uncoordinated. Blood ran from a gash on her forehead, and her left arm hung at an odd angle. "Don't move," Ethan said, gently pressing her back down. "You might have a concussion." She looked at him, then really looked at him, and something flickered in her eyes, recognition. No, that was impossible. They'd never met. He'd remember a woman like this with cheekbones that could cut glass and eyes the color of steel. "I know who you are," she whispered, and Ethan's blood went cold. But before he could ask what she meant, her eyes rolled back and she lost consciousness. The EMTs arrived moments later, immediately taking over. One of them looked at Ethan's burned and cut arms, insisting on treating him, but he waved them off. His watch read 8:47. If he left now, drove like hell, he might still make the interview. "Sir, you need medical attention," the EMT, a young woman with kind eyes, said firmly. "Those burns need treatment." "I'm fine." Ethan was already backing toward his car. "Just make sure she's okay." He ran to his Civic, his hand shaking as he turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then died. He tried again. Nothing. The alternator had finally given up, choosing the worst possible moment to fail. "No, no, no!" He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, feeling the last threads of hope slip away. By the time he called for a tow got to the interview, he'd be at least an hour late. Morrison Tech had made it clear in their email punctuality was non-negotiable. A police officer approached his window. "Sir, we need to get your statement about what happened." Ethan looked at his ruined suit, his burned hands, his dead car, and started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. "Yeah," he said. "Sure. Why not?" The officer looked concerned. "Are you all right, sir?" "Perfect," Ethan replied, getting out of the car. "Absolutely perfect." It took an hour to give his statement, another hour for the tow truck to arrive. By the time Ethan got home, it was nearly noon. Sophie's babysitter, Mrs. Chen, from next door, was watching her morning cartoons with Sophie curled up beside her. "Daddy," Sophie launched herself at him, then stopped, eyes wide. "What happened to your suit and your hands?" "Just a little accident, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." He paid Mrs. Chen with money he'd been saving for groceries, then sat on their threadbare couch as Sophie carefully applied Neosporin and Band-Aids to his burns. "Does it hurt?" she asked, her forehead creased with concentration. "Not when you're taking care of me." She smiled that brilliant smile that made everything else fade away. "I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up. Then I can always take care of you." "What about being a princess who lives in a penthouse?" "I can be both," she said matter-of-factly. "Doctor during the day, princess at night." That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat at their small kitchen table with his notebook, not the expensive leather one from the warehouse, but his own, filled with sketches and ideas he'd never have the chance to build. The local news played on their ancient television, the volume turned low. In other news, Caldwell Innovation CEO Clara Hayes was pulled from her burning vehicle this morning by an unidentified Good Samaritan. Hayes, who was on her way to a crucial board meeting, sustained minor injuries and is recovering at Northwestern Memorial. The identity of her rescuer remains unknown as the man left the scene before he could be properly thanked. If you have any information about this hero Caldwell, Innovations is offering a substantial reward. Ethan turned off the TV. He didn't need rewards or recognition. He needed a job that paid more than minimum wage, a car that actually ran, and a chance to give Sophie the life she deserved. Being a hero didn't pay the bills. His phone rang the landlord, probably wanting to know about the rent, but it was an unknown number. Mr. Cole. This is Jennifer from Morrison Tech HR. I'm calling about your interview this morning. His heart sank.
I'm so sorry. There was an emergency and... Actually, Mr. Cole, that's why I'm calling. We saw the news about the accident on I-90. The timestamp on the police report shows you were the one who pulled that woman from the car. Is that correct? Yes, but Mr. Morrison would like to reschedule your interview for tomorrow if you're available.
Same time. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a flutter of hope. Yes, I'll be there. Excellent. And Mr. Cole, Mr. Morrison asked me to tell you that anyone who risks their life to save a stranger is exactly the kind of person we want on our team. After she hung up, Ethan sat in the darkness for a long moment. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The next morning, he borrowed Mrs. Chen's car wearing his janitor's uniform, the only clean clothes he had left. Morrison Tech occupied 3 floors of a gleaming office building downtown. Ethan felt out of place the moment he walked through the revolving doors, but he kept his head up. Sophie's voice in his head, "You're the bravest daddy in the world." The interview went better than he could have hoped. Mr. Morrison himself conducted it, a gruff man in his 60s who seemed more interested in Ethan's character than his resume. "Says here you dropped out of college," Morrison noted, looking over his glasses. "My wife got sick. Medical bills?" Ethan trailed off, not wanting to sound like he was making excuses. Morrison nodded slowly. "Sometimes life doesn't give us choices. It's what we do with the choices we do have that matters." He closed the folder. "Can you start Monday?" Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You mean assistant maintenance supervisor, probationary, period of 90 days. But based on what I've seen and heard, I don't think that'll be a problem." Walking out of the building, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. He called Mrs. Chen to share the news, and she insisted on watching Sophie for free that evening so he could celebrate. Not that he had money to celebrate with, but he could take Sophie to the park, push her on the swings until she laughed so hard she got hiccups. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the Blacktown car following him. It wasn't until he turned the 3rd corner and the car was still there that alarm bells started ringing. He ducked into a coffee shop, watching through the window as the car pulled to the curb. A man in a dark suit got out looking around. Ethan's mind raced. He didn't owe anyone money, not the kind that sent men in suits after you anyway. He waited until the man walked past the coffee shop, then slipped out and headed in the opposite direction. But there was another man waiting by Mrs. Chen's car. Ethan Cole. The man was tall, professional, with the kind of neutral expression that could mean anything. "Who's asking?" "My name is Richard Brennan. I work for Caldwell Innovations. Ms. Hayes would like to thank you personally for saving her life." "That's not necessary. I did what anyone would do." Nevertheless, she insists. There's a car waiting. Ethan looked at his watch. Sophie would be getting out of school in an hour. "I appreciate the offer, but it won't take long. Ms. Hayes is quite insistent when she sets her mind on something." Something in the man's tone suggested that refusing wasn't really an option. Besides, Ethan was curious about the woman's strange words, "I know who you are." The ride to Caldwell Tower took them through the heart of Chicago's financial district. The building itself was a monument to modern architecture, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Ethan had cleaned its lobby once years ago when his company had a contract with them. He'd never been above the 3rd floor. The executive elevator rose smoothly to the 52nd floor, opening onto a reception area that looked more like a museum than an office. Original paintings lined the walls, and the furniture probably cost more than Ethan would make in his lifetime, even with his new job. "Mr. Cole," a woman's voice said, and he turned to see Clara Hayes herself, her left arm in a designer sling that somehow made her look even more formidable. The gash on her forehead had been expertly concealed with makeup, but he could see the faint outline of stitches. She was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 5'6" in her heels, but she carried herself like someone who'd never been told no. Her steel-gray eyes studied him with an intensity that made him want to check if his shirt was tucked in properly. "Ms. Hayes, how are you feeling?" "Alive, thanks to you." She gestured to a seating area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Please sit. Can I get you anything coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thank you, and really this isn't necessary. Anyone would have done the same." She laughed a short, sharp sound. "No, Mr. Cole, they wouldn't have. Do you know how many cars passed by before you stopped 17? I counted them through the smoke." She sat across from him, her posture perfect despite her injuries. "I owe you my life. That's not a debt I take lightly." "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree." She reached for a tablet on the coffee table, wincing slightly at the movement. "I've had my people do some research. Single father working 3 jobs to make ends meet. Daughter named Sophie, 7 years old, enrolled at Madison Elementary. You were on your way to a job interview when you stopped to help me, an interview you missed." Ethan felt uncomfortable with how much she knew. "I got the job anyway. They rescheduled." "Morrison Tech, yes, I know. Assistant maintenance supervisor. $43,000 a year, basic health benefits." She set down the tablet. "I'd like to offer you something better." "I'm not looking for charity." "It's not charity. It's business." She leaned forward slightly. "Caldwell Innovations needs people like you. People who see problems and solve them, who act when others hesitate. I'm offering you a position in our technical development division. Starting salary of $90,000, full benefits, and educational assistance if you want to finish your degree." The number hit Ethan like a physical blow. $90,000. He could pay off Sarah's remaining medical bills, move to a safer neighborhood, put money away for Sophie's college. "I'm a janitor," he said quietly. "I clean floors. I don't have a degree, don't have experience. You have instincts. That's worth more than a dozen degrees." Clara stood moving to the window. "Do you know what my briefcase contained, the one you risked your life to retrieve?" Ethan shook his head. "Nothing important. Tax documents my assistant could have reprinted in 5 minutes. But you didn't know that. You just knew it mattered to me, so you grabbed it anyway." She turned back to him. "That's the kind of decision-making I need on my team. Ms. Hayes, I appreciate the offer, but there's something else." She picked up a remote and pointed it at a screen on the wall. Security footage began to play the warehouse from last night, the timestamp showing 2:47 a.m. Ethan watched himself approach the prototype machine, studied the exposed wiring. The camera angle changed, showing his face clearly as he examined the problem. His blood ran cold. "I can explain." "No need." Another click and the footage jumped forward to 600 a.m. A team of engineers surrounded the machine, which was now running perfectly. "My head engineer couldn't figure out what happened. The machine that had been failing for 3 weeks suddenly worked flawlessly. Then we reviewed the security footage." She moved closer, those steel eyes boring into his. "You fixed it, didn't you? In less than 5 minutes, you solved a problem that had stumped my best engineers for weeks." I could see what was wrong. The bypass was creating a feedback loop. All I did was reconnect the original conductor and ground the overflow. It was simple, really. Simple." She laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. "Do you have any idea what that machine is worth? What it means to my company?" Ethan shook his head. "It's a prototype for a new kind of medical diagnostic equipment. It could revolutionize how we detect certain cancers. And you fixed it with wire and electrical tape." She sat back down across from him. "So when I say I know who you are, Mr. Cole, I mean it. You're not just a janitor. You're an engineer who life forced into a mop closet. I'm offering you a chance to be who you really are." The weight of her words settled over him. He thought of Sophie, of the dreams he'd put aside, of the notebooks full of designs that would never see the light of day. What if I can't do it? The question came out before he could stop it. What if I'm not what you think I am? Then you'll fail, and I'll fire you. Her bluntness was oddly reassuring. But I don't think you will. I've built this company by trusting my instincts about people, and my instincts say, you're exactly what we need. She stood extending her good hand. Take the weekend to think about it. Talk to your daughter. But Mr. Cole, Ethan, don't let fear make this decision for you. Ethan shook her hand, noting the calluses that suggested she wasn't just a CEO who sat in boardrooms all day. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. She walked him to the elevator, then paused. One more thing. That notebook you found in the warehouse, it's yours, isn't it? He frowned. No, I assume someone from the day shift dropped it. It was found in your locker this morning. My security team brought it to me when they were investigating last night's incident. She handed him the leather-bound notebook he'd found. I looked through it. I hope you don't mind. Ethan opened it, and his heart stopped. But these weren't the technical drawings he'd glimpsed last night. These were his own sketches, his ideas somehow transferred to this expensive notebook. Page after page of designs he'd only ever drawn on napkins and scrap paper, but refined, professional, annotated with technical specifications he'd only dreamed about. I don't understand. These are my ideas, but this isn't my notebook. Clara smiled, a real smile that transformed her face from corporate warrior to something almost vulnerable. It is now. Consider it a signing bonus, whether you take the job or not. Your ideas deserve better than napkins and the backs of envelopes. The elevator doors opened, and Ethan stepped inside, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. As the doors closed, he saw Clara Hayes standing there, silhouetted against the city skyline, looking like someone who was used to getting what she wanted. The ride down felt like descending from another world. By the time he reached the lobby, Ethan's mind was spinning. He walked to Mrs. Chen's car in a daze, the notebook heavy in his hands. His phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. The offer stands indefinitely. Some people are meant for more than they allow themselves to dream. CH. Ethan sat in the car for a long moment, then opened the notebook again. There, in handwriting that wasn't his but captured his ideas perfectly, were designs for a more efficient solar panel, a water purification system that could work in disaster zones, a prosthetic limb that could provide sensory feedback. Ideas he'd sketched on napkins during break time, now rendered in professional detail. On the last page was a note, "These ideas could change the world. They deserve a chance. So do you." He drove to Sophie's school, arriving just as the bell rang. She ran to him, backpack bouncing, face bright with the joy that only children who are truly loved can possess. "Daddy, guess what I got 100 on my spelling test?" "That's amazing, sweetheart." He knelt down to her level. "Hey, what would you think about Daddy getting a new job? Would you be home more?" "Yeah, a lot more." "Would you be happy?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you think I'm not happy?" She touched his face with her small hand. "You smile with your mouth, but not your eyes. Mommy used to say that meant someone was sad inside." Ethan pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and playground dust. "You know what, I think this new job might make me smile with my eyes, too." "But then you should take it," she said simply, as if it were the easiest decision in the world. That evening, as Sophie did her homework at the kitchen table, Ethan called Clara Hayes. She answered on the first ring. "I'll take the job," he said without preamble. "Good. I'll have HR send over the paperwork. You start Monday." "That's the same day I was supposed to start at Morrison Tech." "I know. I've already spoken to Mr. Morrison. He understands and wishes you well. He also said to tell you that anyone who passes up an opportunity like this would be an idiot, and he didn't hire idiots." Ethan laughed, surprising himself. "You've thought of everything." "I try." "Oh, and Ethan, welcome to Caldwell Innovations. I have a feeling you're going to change everything." After they hung up, Ethan looked at Sophie, bent over her homework with the same intensity she brought to everything. He thought of Sarah, how proud she would be to see him taking this chance. He thought of the machine in the warehouse, how right it had felt to fix it to solve the puzzle. Maybe Clara Hayes was right. Maybe some people were meant for more than they allowed themselves to dream. Outside their small apartment, the city lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth. Somewhere out there, in a penthouse, high above the streets, Clara Hayes was probably working late, planning whatever came next for her empire. And starting Monday, Ethan Cole, janitor, single father, forgotten engineer, would be part of that world. "Daddy." Sophie looked up from her homework. Are you smiling with your eyes now? He looked at his reflection in the window, surprised to find that yes, he was. Yeah, baby, I think I am. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and returned to her homework. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, the city's nighttime symphony beginning. But for once, it didn't sound like desperation. It sounded like possibility. Ethan opened the leather notebook again, running his fingers over the sketches of his ideas made real. On Monday, everything would change. But tonight, he was just a father sitting with his daughter, helping her with her math homework, both of them smiling with their eyes. The warehouse district would continue on without him. Another janitor taking his place, pushing the same mop bucket across the same floors. But Ethan Cole was done being invisible. He'd spent 2 years in the shadows, keeping his head down, just trying to survive. Now maybe it was time to live. As Sophie worked on her multiplication tables, Ethan sketched in the notebook, not designs this time, but a picture of his daughter capturing the way she chewed her pencil when she was thinking hard. At the bottom he wrote, "For Sophie, who always believed her daddy could be more." The clock on the wall ticked toward bedtime, and Ethan knew he should start their nighttime routine bath story prayers for Mommy in heaven. But he lingered in this moment, this precipice between what was and what could be. Tomorrow he'd have to figure out how to be an engineer again, how to work with people who'd never worried about choosing between groceries and electricity. He'd have to buy clothes that weren't from Goodwill, learn to navigate a world where his ideas mattered more than his ability to make floors shine. But tonight, he was just Ethan Cole. And that was enough. The notebook full of dreams sat on the table beside Sophie's spelling test, both of them proof that sometimes, if you're very lucky, life gives you a second chance. "Daddy," Sophie asked, not looking up from her homework, "what does serene mean by the peaceful?" He answered, "Calm, like when everything is exactly as it should be." "Oh." She carefully wrote the definition in her notebook. "Like right now." Ethan looked at his daughter at their small but clean apartment, at the notebook that represented a future he'd never dared imagine, and realized she was right. "Yeah, baby, exactly like right now." Monday morning arrived with the kind of Chicago wind that cut through jackets and found every gap in window frames. Ethan stood outside Caldwell Tower at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, watching his reflection in the polished glass doors. The new clothes felt foreign against his skin, business casual. Claire's assistant had called it when she'd sent him to a downtown store with a company credit card. The khakis were pressed sharp enough to cut paper, and the button-down shirt still had that new fabric smell that reminded him of better times before Sarah got sick when they'd shopped together for his college presentations. Sophie had insisted on picking out his tie that morning, choosing a blue one with tiny sailboats that she said looked professional but fun. She'd stood on a chair to help him with the knot, her tongue poking out in concentration, the same way Sarah's used to when she was focused on something important. "You look like you belong in one of those tall buildings now, Daddy," she'd said, smoothing down his collar with her small hands. The security guard at the front desk recognized him from the week before, offering a genuine smile. "Morning, Mr. Cole. Ms. Hayes said you'd be starting today. Elevator bank 3 will take you to 37. Someone from HR will meet you there." 37. Not 52 where Clara's office commanded the skyline, but still higher than Ethan had ever worked before. The elevator filled with people who moved with purpose, checking phones and discussing meetings in the casual shorthand of those who belonged. Ethan kept his hands steady at his sides, fighting the urge to fidget with his unfamiliar collar. The doors opened to reveal a space that hummed with controlled energy. The Technical Development Division occupied the entire floor, an open concept design with glass-walled offices around the perimeter and workstations clustered in the center. Engineers moved between computer screens and prototype stations, their conversations peppered with terms Ethan recognized from his abandoned textbooks. "Ethan Cole." A woman approached, her smile warm but efficient. "I'm Janet from HR. Ready for your first day." The morning dissolved into a blur of paperwork, ID photos, and introductions. Janet led him through the maze of workstations, rattling off names and titles that Ethan tried desperately to remember. The other employees were polite, but curious, their eyes holding questions about who he was and why Clara Hayes had personally hired him. "And this will be your workspace." Janet finally said, stopping at a desk near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't an office, but it had a view of the city that made Ethan's chest tight with something between fear and possibility. A computer that looked like it cost more than his car sat on the desk alongside drafting tools and engineering software manuals. Someone had placed a small potted plant in the corner, a tiny bit of green life amid all the steel and glass. "Mr. Chen will be your direct supervisor," Janet continued, gesturing to a glass office where an older Asian man sat surrounded by monitors. "He's our lead engineer. Clara specifically requested you be placed on his team." Michael Chen was nothing like Ethan expected. Where Clara was all sharp edges and intensity, Chen moved with the measured calm of someone who'd learned that the best solutions rarely came from rushing. His office was organized chaos blueprints layered on every surface, a collection of defunct circuit boards arranged like art on one wall, and at least 6 empty coffee cups in various stages of abandonment. "So you're the janitor who fixed our prototype," Chen said, without preamble, not looking up from the schematic he was studying. "Show me how you did it." Ethan moved to the whiteboard, picking up a marker with hands that barely trembled. He drew the circuit diagram from memory, explaining the feedback loop, the unnecessary bypass, the simple elegance of returning to the original design. When he finished, Chen was leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. "You saw all that in the dark in under 5 minutes. The emergency lighting was enough, and the problem was obvious once you looked at it the right way." "Obvious?" Chen stood, moving to the whiteboard. "My team spent 3 weeks on that obvious problem. 2 of them have PhDs from MIT. He picked up a different colored marker, adding to Ethan's diagram. "But you're right. We were overthinking it, adding complexity where simplicity was needed. Classic engineer's curse." He turned back to Ethan and for the first time smiled. "Clara says you have notebooks full of ideas. I'd like to see them." Ethan pulled out the leather notebook, still feeling like he was handling something that belonged in a museum rather than his messenger bag. Chen flipped through it slowly, occasionally, pausing to study a particular design more closely. "This water purification system," he said, tapping one page. "Have you built a prototype?" "No, I've never had the resources." "You do now." Chen moved to his computer, pulling up a requisition form. "We have a fully equipped lab on 35. Whatever you need to build this within reason. I want a working prototype by end of week." "End of week?" Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "That's 4 days. Is that a problem?" The old Ethan, the one who'd spent 2 years believing he was just a janitor, wanted to say yes. But Sophie's voice echoed in his head, "You're the bravest daddy in the world." "No," he said, straightening his shoulders. "No problem." The lab on 35 was an engineer's dream. 3D printers hummed in one corner while sophisticated testing equipment lined the walls. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer possibility of it all. The last time he'd been in a real lab, Sarah had been healthy, and his biggest worry was passing his thermodynamics exam. "You must be the new guy." A voice made him turn. A young woman with purple-streaked hair and arms covered in technical tattoos grinned at him. "I'm Zoe, mechanical specialist and unofficial keeper of the coffee machine. Chen sent down your requisition list. Ambitious first project." She helped him gather materials, chattering about the lab's quirks and personalities. "Watch out for Harrison, tall guy, always wears bow ties. He's brilliant but territorial about the laser cutter. And if you need anything officially impossible, talk to Raj. He's got connections in every department." Ethan spent the rest of the morning immersed in his work, his hands remembering skills his mind had tried to forget. The purification system was elegant in its simplicity, using graphene filters and UV sterilization in a cascade design that could process contaminated water at 10 times the rate of current portable systems. But theory and practice were different animals, and by lunch, he'd already hit 2 significant obstacles. Engineering is 10% inspiration and 90% creative profanity, Zoe said, finding him glaring at a failed filter housing. "Come on, new guy, lunch break." Chen's rule, no eating in the lab after the incident with Raj and the prototype that turned out to be surprisingly flammable. The cafeteria on 20 was another revelation. Not the sad break room with vending machines Ethan was used to, but a full dining facility with a salad bar and a chef making custom sandwiches. He thought of the peanut butter and jelly he'd packed out of habit, sitting in his messenger bag like a relic from another life. Overwhelmed yet, Chen appeared beside him in the lunch line, selecting a soup that smelled like real vegetables instead of powder and sadness. Honestly terrified. Good. Comfort is where innovation goes to die. Chen paid for both their lunches before Ethan could protest. Tell me about your daughter. The change of subject surprised him. Sophie? She's 7. Smart as hell, sorry heck. Reads everything she can get her hands on. My daughter was the same at that age. She's at Northwestern now, studying biomedical engineering. Chen's expression softened. It's hard balancing this work with being a parent. The hours can be brutal. But Clara understands that. She lost her own father young, built this company partly to prove something to his memory. I didn't know that. She doesn't advertise it, but it's why she values people who fight for their families. Speaking of which, Chen pulled out his phone. There's an after-school program here for employees' kids. Fully funded, includes tutoring and STEM activities. Sophie might enjoy it. Ethan's throat tightened. The program he couldn't afford, the opportunities he couldn't provide, suddenly possible. That would be, yes. She'd love that. The afternoon flew by in a haze of problem-solving and micro-adjustments. By 4 o'clock, Ethan had a partially functioning prototype that only leaked slightly and barely electrocuted him when he connected the UV array. Progress. Not bad for day one, Zoe said, peering over his shoulder. Most new hires spend their first week just figuring out where the bathroom is. At 4:45, Ethan started packing up, anxiety creeping in about picking up Sophie on time. The after-school program didn't start until next week, and Mrs. Chen could only watch her until 5:30. Leaving already, Harrison, the bow-tie-wearing territorial one, raised an eyebrow from his workstation. I have to pick up my daughter. Ah, a clock watcher. The dismissal in his tone was sharp enough to cut. A father. Chen's voice came from behind them. There's a difference, Harrison. One you might understand if you had priorities beyond your publications. Harrison flushed and turned back to his work. Chen walked Ethan to the elevator. Don't mind him. Brilliance and social skills rarely coexist. You did good work today, Ethan. Real good work. The commute to Sophie's school in his repaired Honda felt like traveling between worlds. The Caldwell Tower disappeared in his rearview mirror, replaced by the familiar streets of their neighborhood, check-cashing stores and beauty supplies, the corner bodega where Mr. Kim sometimes let Sophie pick a free piece of candy. Sophie was waiting on the school steps, backpack at her feet, reading a library book that looked far too advanced for second grade. When she saw him, her face lit up like Christmas morning. Daddy, how was your first day? Did you build something? Are the people nice? Is your office really high up? He answered her rapid-fire questions on the drive home, editing out Harrison's coldness and his own moments of panic. She listened with the intense focus she brought to everything that mattered to her. Can I see where you work sometime? She asked as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. Maybe. There's actually a program there for kids after school. You could come with me and do activities while I finish work. Really? Her eyes went wide. Like science stuff. Exactly like science stuff. That evening, as Sophie did homework and Ethan sketched refinements to his prototype, his phone buzzed. Text from Clara Hayes. Chen says you're exceeding expectations. I knew you would. He started to type a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. Finally sent, thank you for the chance. Her reply was immediate. You earned it. Stop thanking me and start changing the world. Tuesday came with new challenges. The prototype that had shown promise now refused to maintain consistent flow rates. Ethan found himself in the lab at 6 a.m., an hour before official start time, taking apart the filter housing for the dozenth time. You're here early. Claire's voice made him jump, sending tiny screws scattering across the workbench. She stood in the doorway, impeccable, despite the early hour coffee in one hand and tablet in the other. The sling was gone, though she still moved her left arm carefully. Couldn't sleep, Ethan admitted, gathering the scattered pieces. Kept thinking about the pressure differential in the second stage. And she moved closer, genuinely interested. I think I've been approaching it wrong. Instead of fighting the pressure variance, I should use it. Make it part of the filtration process. Clara set down her coffee, picking up one of the filter components with careful fingers. Show me. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan forgot she was the CEO, forgot his nervousness, forgot everything except the problem and its solution. They worked side by side, Clara asking questions that pushed his thinking in new directions, her understanding of engineering deeper than he'd expected from someone who spent most of her time in boardrooms. You know, she said, watching him reassemble the housing with the new configuration, I started this company in a garage with nothing but an idea and stubbornness that everyone said would be my downfall. What was the idea? That medical technology didn't have to be expensive to be effective, that sometimes the simple solution was also the best one. She smiled a real smile that made her look younger. You remind me of myself then, hungry, determined, unwilling to accept that things have to be the way they've always been. I'm just trying to make something work. No, she said quietly. You're trying to make something matter. There's a difference. Chen arrived to find them both bent over the prototype debating flow dynamics with the passion of academics half their age. Should I come back? He asked, amusement clear in his voice. Clara straightened, CEO mask sliding back into place. I was just leaving. Board meeting at 8. She paused at the door. Ethan, when you get this working, not if when I want to see it. We might have a humanitarian contract that could use exactly this kind of innovation. After she left, Chen whistled low. In 15 years, I've never seen her in the lab before 8, and definitely never working on a prototype herself. She was just nothing. Clara Hayes doesn't do anything without purpose. He studied Ethan with those calm, measuring eyes. She sees something in you. Same thing I'm starting to see. Don't let Harrison or anyone else convince you it's not real. Wednesday brought a breakthrough. The pressure differential that had been his enemy became his ally, creating a natural vortex that increased filtration efficiency by 30%. Zoe actually whooped when they ran the test, drawing curious looks from the other engineers. Holy shit, sorry, this is incredible. She was already pulling up comparison data on her tablet. This outperforms military-grade systems at a fraction of the cost. Do you know what this means? Ethan did. It meant clean water for disaster zones, for refugee camps, for communities that had been told solutions were too expensive. It meant his idea, born during late-night janitor shifts, could actually help people. We need to run durability tests, he said, trying to contain his own excitement. And the UV array still needs work. I can help with that, Harrison said quietly from behind them. They turned to find him holding a component Ethan recognized as bleeding-edge UV LED technology. I've been working on something similar for sterilization in surgical tools. The wavelength optimization should translate. It was as close to an apology as Ethan suspected Harrison could manage. He took the component carefully. That would be great. Thank you. By Thursday, they had a fully functioning prototype. It wasn't pretty, held together with determination and what Zoe called engineering tape, which looked suspiciously like regular duct tape, but it worked. Water, when uncontaminated, came out cleaner than most tap water. Run it again, Chen said, watching the readouts with the intensity of a hawk. With the worst sample we have. They fed it water contaminated with bacteria, heavy metals, and organic compounds that made Ethan's stomach turn. 30 seconds later, the output tested cleaner than bottled water. Jesus, someone whispered. Word had spread, and half the floor was now crowded around the testing station. Get Clara to, Chen said quietly to his assistant. She needs to see this. Clara arrived within minutes, despite being in the middle of what looked like a major presentation, judging by the board members trailing in her wake. She took in the crowd, the prototype, the test results displayed on the monitor. Show me, she said simply. Ethan ran the demonstration, his hands steady, now his voice clear as he explained each stage of the process. The board members, men and women who looked like they ate $1,000 dinners for breakfast, leaned in genuinely interested. When he finished, the room was silent. Cost per unit? Clara asked. Under $200 at scale, Ethan replied. Maybe less with optimized manufacturing. Current comparable systems. 2,000 to 5,000 minimum. Clara turned to the board members. This is why I hired him. This is what fresh perspective brings to Caldwell Innovations. She looked back at Ethan. File the patent paperwork. I want this in production within 6 months. The room erupted in congratulations, backs slapped, and hands shaken. But Ethan barely heard it, his mind already racing with improvements, refinements, possibilities. That night he brought Sophie to the office for the first time, officially enrolling her in the after-school program. She stood in the lobby, neck craned back to see where the building disappeared into the evening sky. You work all the way up there, Siam. Floor 37. Want to see. The after-hours security guard smiled as they signed in. Bringing in the next generation, Mr. Cole. Something like that. Sophie was uncharacteristically quiet as the elevator rose her hand tight in his. When they stepped onto the technical floor, most people had gone home, leaving only the dedicated or obsessed. The city sparkled beyond the windows' lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over Chicago. This is my desk, Ethan said, showing her his workspace. The potted plant had been joined by a picture frame he'd brought in the photo of Sophie and Sarah from last Christmas, the one where they were both laughing at something off camera. Sophie touched the computer monitor gently like it might break. This is really yours. Really mine. And look, he led her to the lab where his prototype sat on the main workbench. This is what I've been building. What does it do? It makes dirty water clean, so people who don't have good water can drink safely. She considered this seriously. Like the people in those commercials, the ones who have to walk really far for water. Exactly like them. So you're helping them from all the way up here, trying to. She smiled then, that brilliant smile that was pure Sarah. Mommy would be proud. Ethan's throat closed up. He knelt down, pulling her into a hug. You think so? I know so. She always said you were meant for big things. She was right. Friday arrived with nervous energy. Chen had scheduled a full presentation for the executive team, complete with potential deployment scenarios and manufacturing projections. Ethan had barely slept running through his presentation over and over. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, Zoe said, watching him pace. It's going to be fine, better than fine. You've created something amazing. It's not about the presentation, Ethan admitted. It's all of this. 5 days ago, I was mopping floors. Now I'm supposed to stand in front of executives and convince them to invest millions in my idea. What if they realize I don't belong here? Imposter syndrome, Harrison said, not looking up from his work. Statistically, 90% of successful people experience it. The other 10% are psychopaths. He paused. You're not a psychopath, are you? I don't think so. Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The presentation went better than Ethan could have hoped. The executives asked hard questions, but he had answers. The prototype performed flawlessly, even when they deliberately tried to overload it. By the end, he had preliminary approval for a pilot program in Puerto Rico, where communities were still struggling with water infrastructure after the hurricanes. Celebrate, Chen ordered as the executives filed out. Monday, you can panic about actually delivering on what you just promised. Tonight, celebrate. But Ethan couldn't quite manage celebration. He stood at the window watching the city below, feeling the weight of success almost as heavily as he'd felt failure. His phone buzzed, Mrs. Chen reminding him about Sophie's school play next Friday. You did it, Claire's voice came from behind him. She joined him at the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. You took an idea and made it real. How does it feel? Terrifying, he answered honestly, like I'm going to wake up and be pushing a mop bucket again. That fear never really goes away, but you learn to use it to let it drive you instead of paralyze you. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said about saving my briefcase, how you didn't know it was worthless but saved it anyway because it mattered to me. Anyone would have... No, they wouldn't. Most people would have saved themselves. You saw someone who needed help, and you acted even though it cost you. She turned to face him directly. That's why I knew you belonged here. Not because you can engineer solutions, though you clearly can, but because you understand that innovation without humanity is just clever emptiness. She handed him an envelope. Don't open it now. Wait until you get home. And Ethan. This is just the beginning. I have a feeling you're going to surprise all of us yourself most of all." After she left, Ethan tucked the envelope into his bag and went to collect Sophie from the after-school program. He found her in the science room wearing safety goggles that were too big for her face, carefully pipetting colored liquids into test tubes. "Daddy? Look, I'm doing real science." The instructor, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled. "She's a natural, asks the kind of questions that show real understanding." On the drive home, Sophie chattered about pH levels and chemical reactions, her excitement infectious. It wasn't until they were eating dinner, actual fresh vegetables, instead of the frozen dinners that had become their staple, that Ethan remembered the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a check. The paper was a photocopy of a medical bill, Sarah's final hospital stay, the one that had haunted Ethan's finances for 2 years. Across it, in Clara's precise handwriting, paid in full, fresh starts shouldn't come with old chains. The check was something else entirely. A bonus, the memo line read, but the amount made Ethan's hands shake. Enough to move to a better apartment, to start a college fund for Sophie, to maybe finally exhale. "What is it, Daddy?" Sophie asked, concerned by his silence. It's a chance, baby. A real chance." That weekend they went apartment hunting. Not in the luxury buildings downtown, but in a neighborhood with good schools and a park where Sophie could ride her bike without Ethan fearing for her safety. They found a 2-bedroom with actual sunlight, a kitchen that didn't smell like other people's cooking, and a small balcony where Ethan could put a few plants. "Can we really afford this?" Sophie whispered, afraid to hope. "Yeah, baby, we really can." They moved the next weekend with help from an unexpected source. Zoe showed up with her pickup truck. Harrison brought his surprisingly muscular boyfriend and a talent for organization, and even Chen appeared with coffee and donuts for everyone. It took them half the time Ethan had expected, their old life fitting into remarkably few boxes. "It's not much," Ethan said apologetically, as Zoe helped him carry in the couch they'd bought from a second-hand store. "It's home," she corrected. "That's everything." As the sun set on their first night in the new apartment, Ethan stood on the balcony while Sophie arranged her stuffed animals in her new room. The city spread out before him, not threatening now, but full of possibility. His phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "How's the new place?" He thought about not responding, maintaining professional boundaries. But she'd given him more than a job. She'd given him a chance to be the person he'd almost forgotten he could be. "It's perfect," he typed back. "Sophie's already planning where to put her science fair trophies. She'll win them. She has her father's innovation and her mother's determination." Ethan smiled at that, though Clara had never met Sarah. Somehow she understood. "Thank you for everything." "Stop thanking me. Start working on your next innovation. The world needs more solutions from people who understand problems." Inside, Sophie called for him to read her a bedtime story. Not a picture book anymore, but one of the chapter books she devoured like candy. As he read about adventures and mysteries, his daughter curled against his side. Ethan thought about the notebook full of ideas about the problems still waiting to be solved, about the life they were building one day at a time. A week ago, he'd been invisible, a ghost pushing a mop through empty buildings. Now he was an engineer again, an inventor, a father, who could provide more than just survival. The transformation felt too quick, too complete to be real. But Sophie's weight against his side was real. The new apartment key in his pocket was real. The prototype sitting in Caldwell's lab was real. "Daddy," Sophie's voice was drowsy. "Are you happy?" He thought about it, really thought about it. "Yeah, baby, I think I am." "With your eyes, too." He caught his reflection in her bedroom window and was surprised to see she was right. He was smiling with his whole face, the kind of smile he hadn't worn since before the hospital, before the bills, before the world had shrunk to the size of a mop bucket. "With my eyes, too." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep. Ethan stayed there holding his daughter in their new home, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the pilot program to implement Harrison's territorial nature, to navigate the constant fear that he wasn't qualified for this new life. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Ethan Cole felt like himself again. Not the janitor who'd saved a CEO from a burning car, but the engineer, the inventor, the father who could give his daughter the world or at least a small bright piece of it, HSE. The Puerto Rico deployment was scheduled for 3 weeks after the presentation, leaving Ethan in a constant state of controlled panic. He arrived at the office each morning before dawn, refining the prototype while the city still slept. The lab became his second home, littered with coffee cups and calculations scrawled on every available surface. "You're going to burn out," Zoe warned. Finding him asleep at his workbench one Tuesday morning, his face pressed against technical drawings that had left grid marks on his cheek. "Just need to optimize the UV array efficiency by another 12%, he mumbled, still half asleep. "You need to go home. Sophie needs a father, not a ghost who smells like solder and regret." The mention of Sophie snapped him fully awake. He checked his phone, 3 missed calls from the after-school program. His stomach dropped as he dialed back, apologies already forming on his lips. "Mr. Cole, Sophie's fine," the program coordinator assured him quickly. "But she's been here 2 hours past pickup time. This is the 3rd time this week." The guilt hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on helping hypothetical strangers that he'd forgotten the very real little girl who needed him. 20 minutes later, he found Sophie in the program's reading corner, her homework long finished, working her way through a book about Marie Curie. "I'm so sorry, baby," he said, kneeling beside her chair. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much understanding for a 7-year-old. "It's okay, Daddy. You're doing important work. Marie Curie missed dinner sometimes too when she was discovering radium." "That doesn't make it right." Sophie closed her book carefully, marking her place with an origami butterfly she'd made from scrap paper. "Are you saving the world?" "Trying to." "Then I can wait. But maybe," she added with a small smile, "you could save it a little faster so we can have pizza night again." That night, Ethan forced himself to leave the office at a reasonable hour. They had pizza at their favorite place, a little restaurant where the owner, Mr. Antonelli, always snuck Sophie extra breadsticks. As she chattered about her day, showing him a science project about ecosystems that had earned her a gold star, Ethan realized he'd been repeating his old pattern, sacrificing the present for a future that might never come. "Tell me about Puerto Rico," Sophie said suddenly, cheese stringing from her slice. "Are you going there?" He hadn't told her about the deployment yet, hadn't figured out how to explain that he'd be gone for a week. "Yeah, baby, next week, to install the water systems in communities that need them." "Can I come?" "Not this time. It's a work trip and you have school." Her face fell slightly, but she rallied quickly. "Will you take pictures so I can see where my daddy's helping people every single day?" Clara called that evening after Sophie was asleep. "Final briefing tomorrow. The humanitarian coordinator wants to meet you, discuss deployment strategies. I'll be there." "Ethan." She paused, unusual for someone typically so direct. "This is a big responsibility. These communities have been promised help before and been disappointed. We can't be another failure." "We won't be." "You sound certain." He thought of Sophie's faith in him, of the water that had run clear through his prototype thousands of times now. "I am." The humanitarian coordinator turned out to be a woman named Dr. Maria Santos, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too many disasters. She spread maps across the conference table, marking communities with red pins. "These areas have been without reliable water for 18 months, she said, her accent carrying hints of the island she was fighting to help. "Children are getting sick. Elderly people are dying from dehydration and waterborne diseases. Your system works in a lab, Mr. Cole. Can it work in mud and heat and desperation?" "It was designed for exactly that," Ethan replied, meeting her skeptical gaze. "I didn't build it for laboratories. I built it for people who need water more than they need promises." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "We leave Monday. Bring work clothes. This isn't a photo opportunity. It's hard labor in hard conditions." "I've done hard labor my whole life, Dr. Santos. At least this time it's for something that matters." The weekend before departure, Ethan took Sophie to the Museum of Science and Industry. They spent hours in the exhibits, Sophie asking questions that made other parents smile and take pictures of the earnest little girl interrogating the museum guides. In the water exhibition, she pulled him to a display about water scarcity. "This is what you're fixing, right?" she said, pointing to statistics about children who died from contaminated water. Trying to, yeah. She slipped her hand into his, squeezing tight. Mommy would be really proud of you. That night, while packing, Ethan found Sarah's wedding ring in his drawer, tucked inside the small velvet box where he'd kept it since the funeral. He'd never been able to bring himself to sell it, even when the electricity was shut off, even when Sophie needed shoes. Now he held it up to the light, remembering how it had looked on Sarah's finger as she held their newborn daughter. I'm trying, Sarah, he whispered to the empty room. I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be. Monday arrived gray and humid, the kind of Chicago morning that promised storms by afternoon. Sophie clung to him at Mrs. Chen's apartment, where she'd be staying for the week. You'll call every night? She asked, face buried in his shirt. Every single night, and Mrs. Chen is going to take you to school and pick you up just like normal. I'll miss you. I'll miss you too, baby, but I'll be back Sunday and I'll have so many stories to tell you. The flight to San Juan felt like crossing into another world. Below the island sprawled green and damaged, beautiful and broken in equal measure. Clara sat across from him in the company jet, reviewing deployment schedules with an intensity that suggested she hadn't slept much either. Nervous? She asked, catching him staring out the window. Terrified. Good. It means you understand what's at stake. Dr. Santos met them at a small airport in the mountains, driving a mud-splattered truck that had seen better decades. The roads were more suggestion than reality, washed out in places and barely wide enough for the vehicle in others. Clara gripped the door handle with white knuckles, but Ethan felt oddly at home. This was real in a way the Caldwell Tower could never be. The first community was a collection of houses clinging to a hillside, their roofs still draped with blue tarps from the hurricane 2 years prior. Children played in the street, stopping to stare as the truck pulled up. The water distribution center was a concrete building with no roof, just twisted metal beams reaching toward the sky like broken fingers. This is where they come for water, Dr. Santos explained, showing them plastic barrels that looked like they hadn't been properly cleaned in months. When there is water, the trucks come maybe twice a week if the roads are passable. Ethan was already unpacking the prototype, his movements efficient. Where's the most contaminated source? An elderly man named Carlos led them to a stream that ran brown with runoff and waste. The smell made Clara step back, her hand covering her nose, but Ethan knelt at the water's edge, filling sample containers. You can't seriously expect to purify that, Clara said. Watch me. It took him an hour to set up the system, connecting it to a small generator they'd brought. A crowd had gathered, curious but skeptical. He'd seen that look before, the expression of people who'd been disappointed too many times to hope. When he turned on the system, it hummed to life, pulling in the contaminated water. 30 seconds felt like 30 years as everyone waited. Then clear water began flowing from the output valve. Carlos was the first to approach, cupping his weathered hands under the stream. He brought the water to his lips cautiously, then drank deeply. His eyes widened. Es limpia, he said softly. Then louder to the crowd, the water is clean. The chaos that followed was beautiful. Children ran to get cups and bottles. Mothers cried as they watched their babies drink safely, and old women blessed Ethan in rapid Spanish. He couldn't understand but felt in his bones. This is just one system, Clara said quietly beside him. Watching a little girl Sophie's age fill a pink plastic cup, her smile radiant. We need hundreds. Then we'd better get to work. They installed 3 more systems that day, each deployment faster as they developed a rhythm. Clara surprised him by stripping off her designer jacket and helping to dig trenches for the intake pipes, mud streaking her face and arms. Dr. Santos translated as Ethan trained local teenagers to maintain the systems, showing them how to replace filters and check the UV arrays. That night they stayed in a local family's home, sleeping on air mattresses in a room with no glass in the windows. Ethan called Sophie on the satellite phone standing outside to get better reception. Did you help people today, Daddy? Her voice crackled through the connection. Yeah, baby. A lot of people. Tell me everything. So he did, painting pictures with words of the children who looked like her, the water that ran clear the way hope looked when it flooded back into tired eyes. When they hung up, he found Clara sitting on the porch steps, staring at the stars visible through the gap in the jungle canopy. Can't sleep? He asked, joining her. Thinking about my father. He was an engineer too, designed bridges. He used to say that engineering was just applied hope building tomorrow's solutions for today's problems. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Died when I was 15. Heart attack at his drafting table working on a bridge that would connect two communities that had been separated for generations. She pulled her knees to her chest, looking younger in the moonlight. I built Caldwell to continue his work in a way, but somewhere along the line I got lost in board meetings and profit margins. Forgot that it was supposed to be about helping people. You're here now. Because of you. She turned to look at him. You reminded me why this matters. That janitor who saved me from my burning car. He saved me from more than fire. The next days blurred together in a marathon of installations and training. They worked from dawn until well past dusk. Ethan's hands blistering from the manual labor, Clara's business manicure destroyed beyond recognition. But with each system they installed, each community they connected to clean water. The exhaustion felt more like accomplishment. On Thursday, they reached a school that had been closed for 6 months due to lack of safe water. The principal, a woman named Isabella, wept openly as Ethan showed her how to operate the system. The children can come back now, she kept saying. They can come back. Clara was on her phone immediately arranging for educational supplies to be shipped, computers to be donated, whatever the school needed to reopen. Watching her work, Ethan understood that this was who she really was. Not the cold CEO in the tower, but someone who solved problems with the same intensity she brought to everything else. That evening, the community threw an impromptu celebration. Music poured from speakers powered by car batteries, and people danced in the street despite their exhaustion. Children performed a play they'd rehearsed, something about a wizard who brought clean water to the kingdom. Ethan realized with a start that the wizard wore glasses held together with tape, just like his. You're a hero to them, Dr. Santos said, appearing beside him with a plate of rice and beans. I'm just an engineer. No, you're someone who saw suffering and chose to act. That's the definition of a hero, Mr. Cole. Claire was dancing with a group of young girls, laughing as they taught her the steps to something that looked far more complex than any boardroom negotiation. She caught Ethan watching and waved him over, but he shook his head, content to observe this version of her, unguarded and genuinely happy. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie sent through Mrs. Chen's phone. Science teacher says I can do my project on water purification. Can you help when you get home? Of course, baby, he typed back. We'll build something amazing. Friday brought challenges. One of the systems developed a leak in a connection Ethan thought he'd secured properly. It took 3 hours in the crushing heat to fix it, during which time he seriously questioned every life choice that had brought him to this moment. But then a grandmother brought him water purified through his system and told him through Dr. Santos that her grandson hadn't had diarrhea in 3 days, the longest stretch in months. This is why we do it, Clara said, helping him tighten the last connection. Not for the patents or the profit, but for that grandmother's smile. That night, their last in Puerto Rico, they sat on a hilltop overlooking the valley where they'd installed 12 systems. Lights twinkled in houses that had been dark for months, powered by the small solar panels that ran the UV arrays. We did that, Clara said softly. We brought light back. We brought more than light, Ethan replied. Thinking of the children who could return to school, the babies who wouldn't get sick, the communities that could rebuild with one less critical problem to solve. I want to do more. Not just Puerto Rico, everywhere water is a crisis. Africa, India, Flint. Will you help me? He thought of Sophie, of the life they were building in Chicago, of the stability he'd fought so hard to achieve. Yes, but I need to be home for my daughter. She's already lost one parent to a cause bigger than our family. We'll figure it out. Remote monitoring local teams for installation, whatever it takes. I'm not asking you to choose between changing the world and raising Sophie. I'm asking you to do both. The flight home Saturday afternoon was quiet, both of them exhausted beyond words. Clara worked on her tablet arranging manufacturing contracts to mass-produce the systems. Ethan sketched improvements in his notebook ideas that had come from seeing the systems in actual use, but mostly they sat in companionable silence, two people who'd shared something that couldn't quite be expressed in words. Sophie was waiting at the airport with Mrs. Chen breaking free to run into Ethan's arms the moment she saw him. He lifted her up, spinning her around while she laughed, her joy infectious enough to make other travelers smile. "Did you save everyone?" she asked when he finally set her down. "Not everyone, but we made a good start." She noticed Clara then standing a respectful distance away. "Are you Daddy's boss?" Clara smiled, the expression softer than her usual corporate demeanor. "I am. You must be Sophie. Your father talks about you constantly." "He does." Sophie looked pleased. "He talks about you too. He says you're scary smart and that you work too hard." "Sophie," Ethan felt his face flush, but Clara laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. "Your father's not wrong, on both counts." Mrs. Chen invited Clara to join them for dinner, an offer that surprised everyone, including Clara, but she accepted, following them to a small Chinese restaurant that Mrs. Chen claimed had the best dumplings in Chicago. Watching Clara try to teach Sophie to use chopsticks while Mrs. Chen told embarrassing stories about Ethan's failed attempts at fixing her sink, he felt something shift in his chest. This strange makeshift family forming around shared meals and small victories. "Mr. Cole is a good man," Mrs. Chen told Clara, while Ethan was helping Sophie with her fortune cookie. "He works too hard, forgets to eat, but he loves that little girl more than life." "I know," Claire replied, watching Ethan help Sophie sound out the fortune. "It's one of his best qualities." That night after Sophie was asleep, Ethan sat on his balcony looking through the photos from Puerto Rico. In one, Clara was helping a young boy fill his water bottle, her expression focused and kind. In another, she was covered in mud, laughing at something Dr. Santos had said. This was the Clara Hayes the boardroom never saw, the one who'd emerged in the Puerto Rican mountains. His phone rang. "Clara." "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Thinking about next steps. I want to present the Puerto Rico success to the board Monday push for a full humanitarian division. Will you co-present? I'm an engineer, not a presenter. You're a storyteller. I've heard you explain complex systems to 7-year-olds and 70-year-olds with equal success. The board needs to hear from you, needs to understand why this matters beyond profit margins. What if they don't approve? Then I'll fund it myself. This is too important to stop now." After they hung up, Ethan pulled out his notebook, writing down not technical specifications, but stories: Carlos drinking clean water for the first time in months, Isabella crying over her reopened school, the grandmother whose grandson was finally healthy. These were the reasons that mattered, the human element that no spreadsheet could capture. Sunday was Sophie's science fair. Ethan helped her set up her display about water purification, complete with a small working model they'd built together Saturday night. She wore her best dress, the one with flowers that Sarah had bought before she got too sick to shop. "Do I look like a scientist?" Sophie asked, adjusting her handmade badge that said future engineer. "You look like someone who's going to change the world." Other parents and children filled the gymnasium, projects ranging from volcano models to plant growth experiments. But Sophie's project drew a crowd, especially when she demonstrated the miniature purification system with the confidence of someone who'd been listening to her father's explanations for weeks. "My daddy built a big version of this to help people in Puerto Rico," she told the judges proudly. "He says engineering is just solving puzzles that help people." She won second place, beaten only by an 8th grader with a project on renewable energy. But Sophie didn't care about the ranking. She was thrilled with her red ribbon and the certificate that proclaimed her an outstanding young scientist. "Can we frame it?" she asked, clutching the certificate carefully. "We'll frame it and put it right next to your mom's nursing degree," Ethan promised. That evening, Clara called with unexpected news. "The board meeting's been moved up. They want to hear about Puerto Rico tomorrow morning, 8 sharp. "I haven't prepared anything formal." "You don't need formal. You need honest. Tell them what you told me on that hillside. Make them see the faces, not just the numbers." Ethan barely slept, running through what he wanted to say. When his alarm went off at 5 a.m., he found Sophie already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal. "Big day, Ma," she asked, noting his best suit laid out on the couch. "Board meeting, trying to convince them to help more people." She got up and hugged him, fierce and sudden. "They'll say yes. You're very convincing. You convinced me to eat vegetables." "That's different, baby." "Not really. You made me understand why vegetables mattered. You'll make them understand why the water matters. At Caldwell Tower, the boardroom was intimidating in its corporate perfection. 12 board members sat around a table that cost more than most people's cars, their faces professionally neutral. Clara introduced him simply as the lead engineer on the Puerto Rico project. Ethan stood his notes forgotten in his pocket. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed them pictures. Not the professional photos the marketing team had taken, but his personal ones. Carlos, Isabella, the grandmother, the children dancing in the street. "This is why we went to Puerto Rico," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Not for market share or tax breaks or good PR. We went because people needed help and we had the ability to provide it." He talked for 20 minutes, forgetting to be nervous, forgetting these were people who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. He talked about children who could return to school, about communities rebuilding with dignity, about the simple miracle of clean water. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one board member, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, spoke up. "How much would it cost to deploy these systems globally?" Clara stood pulling up projections on the screen. "Initial investment of $50 million would let us reach approximately 10,000 communities in the first year. And the return on investment? Minimal direct financial return," Clara admitted, "but invaluable in terms of corporate reputation, employee morale, and moral obligation." "Moral obligation doesn't pay dividends," another board member said. "No," Ethan interjected, surprising himself. "But it lets you sleep at night. It lets you look at your grandchildren and know you chose to help when you could have chosen profit." The sharp-eyed woman smiled. "You sound like Clara's father. He once told this board that bridges were more than steel and concrete. They were promises that communities made to each other." She looked around the table. "I move to approve the humanitarian division with Mr. Cole as technical director." "I second," another member said quickly. The vote was 9-3 in favor. Clara maintained her composure until they were in the elevator, then grabbed Ethan's arm, her excitement breaking through. "Technical director." "That wasn't part of the plan." "The board likes you. More importantly, they trust you. Will you accept?" Ethan thought of the systems still to be built, the problems still to be solved, the communities still waiting for help. "I need to be home for Sophie. Full remote capability when not on deployment, and Sophie can come on some trips when school permits. I want her to see what her father is building." "Then yes." Clara smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed her from CEO to simply a woman who just won something important. "We're going to change the world, Ethan Cole. We're going to try." That evening, Ethan took Sophie out for ice cream to celebrate their tradition for big moments. She listened with wide eyes as he explained his new role, what it would mean for their future. "So you're like a superhero now?" she asked, chocolate sauce on her chin. "Saving people with water. I'm just an engineer who got lucky." "No," Sophie said seriously. "You're my daddy who helps people. That's way better than a superhero." As they walked home, Sophie's hand in his, Ethan thought about the journey from that burning car on the highway to this moment. How a chance encounter had led to Puerto Rico to clean water for thousands, to a future he couldn't have imagined. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Santos. "The communities are asking when you're coming back." The children drew pictures of the water wizard. He showed Sophie the attached photos, childish drawings of a man with glasses bringing blue water to brown landscapes. "That's you," Sophie said excitedly. "You're famous. Not famous, just helpful." "That's better," she decided, then paused. "Daddy, do you think Mommy knows about all the people you're helping?" Ethan pulled her close, thinking of Sarah's unwavering faith in him, even when he'd lost faith in himself. "Yeah, baby, I think she knows." The humanitarian division's office occupied half of floor 35, a space Claire had carved out, despite protests from the CFO about profitable square footage. Ethan stood in what would be his new workspace, surrounded by boxes of equipment and maps marked with red pins indicating water crises across 3 continents. Through the window, Chicago's skyline stretched toward Lake Michigan, but his mind was already in villages thousands of miles away. "Big upgrade from the janitor's closet," Zoe said, appearing with a coffee that smelled like civilization. She'd been promoted to as senior engineer, her purple hair now streaked with blue in celebration. Different kind of cleaning, Ethan replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Instead of mopping up messes, we're preventing them. Poetic. Harrison's having a meltdown, by the way. Says you're stealing all the good engineers for your charity project. It's not charity, I know what it is. Zoe's expression turned serious. It's why I requested the transfer. That video from Puerto Rico, the kids drinking clean water for the first time. That's the kind of engineering I got into this field to do. The video had gone viral. Someone from the community posting phone footage of the first successful system test. Ethan hadn't even known they were being filmed until Clara showed him the clip with 2 million views. In it, he looked exhausted and filthy, but his smile when the water ran clear was genuine enough to make strangers cry in comment sections worldwide. We have the Kenya project briefing in an hour, Zoe reminded him. 20 villages, drought conditions, contamination from industrial runoff. It's going to make Puerto Rico look easy. Ethan pulled up the satellite images on his monitor, studying the terrain. We'll need to modify the intake system for lower water levels. Maybe add a preliminary filtration stage for the industrial chemicals. Already on it. She produced a tablet with design modifications. I also reached out to a local NGO for partnership. They have people on the ground who know the communities. This was why he'd fought for Zoe to join the team. She didn't just solve engineering problems, she thought about the human element, the cultural considerations that could make or break a deployment. Clara arrived for the briefing with someone unexpected, a young man who looked like he'd stepped out of a college catalog, all pressed khakis and nervous energy. This is James Morrison, she announced, son of your almost employer. He just graduated from MIT with a degree in environmental engineering. He'll be joining your team. Ethan shook the young man's hand, noting the calluses that suggested he wasn't just a theory guy. Your father spoke highly of you. He spoke highly of you too, Mr. Cole. Said you were the one who got away. James grinned. He also said if I was smart, I'd learn everything I could from you. The Kenya briefing was sobering. The water situation was critical, with children walking 6 miles daily to fetch contaminated water that was slowly killing them. The industrial runoff had created a toxic cocktail that standard filtration couldn't handle. We need a 2-stage system, Ethan said, sketching on the whiteboard. Chemical precipitation first, then our standard filtration. That doubles the cost per unit, Clara pointed out. Then we find the money. These kids are dying, Clara. She nodded, already making notes. I'll talk to the board. Maybe structure it as a research opportunity, developing new filtration technology we can eventually commercialize. Whatever story you need to tell, Ethan said. Just get us the funding. That evening, Sophie's art class was having a parent showcase. Ethan barely made it sliding into the gymnasium as Sophie was explaining her painting to a small group of parents. It was a watercolor of a man in glasses standing next to a blue river with children playing in the clean water. The technical accuracy of the filtration system drawn in the corner made him smile. Only his daughter would include engineering specifications in her art. That's my daddy, she told the group proudly. He makes dirty water clean so kids don't get sick. One of the mothers, someone Ethan recognized from pickup but had never spoken to, approached him afterward. Is that true? What Sophie said about the water? It's a simplified version, but yes. I saw the video from Puerto Rico. My company would like to discuss a partnership. We manufacture medical supplies, seems like our missions might align. She handed him a business card. Andrea Patterson, CEO of Med Supply International. Ethan pocketed it, his mind already racing with possibilities. At home, while Sophie did homework, he called Clara about the potential partnership. Andrea Patterson is tough but fair, Clara said. If she's interested, it's worth pursuing. Medical supplies would complement our water systems perfectly. I'm an engineer, not a businessman. You're whatever these communities need you to be. That's what leadership means, Ethan. The next morning brought unexpected news. The Puerto Rico systems were functioning perfectly, but the local government wanted to expand the program. They were offering partial funding for 100 more units if Caldwell could deliver within 3 months. That's impossible, James said at the emergency meeting. We don't have the manufacturing capacity. Then we find it, Ethan replied, pulling up his contacts.
Zoe reach out to those fabrication shops in Milwaukee. James start modifying the design for faster assembly. We'll need to simplify without sacrificing effectiveness. What about quality control, Clara asked. I'll personally inspect every 10th unit.
We can't afford failures, not when people are depending on us. The next weeks blurred into a marathon of 18-hour days. Ethan divided his time between the Chicago lab, the Milwaukee fabrication shops, and video calls with the Kenya NGO. Sophie started doing her homework in his office after school, understanding, without being told that this was temporary, that Daddy was doing something important. You look tired, she observed one evening, glancing up from her math worksheet. Just a little busy baby. Ms. Patterson came to school today. Ethan looked up from his laptop. Andrea Patterson. Why? Career Day. She talked about helping people with medical supplies. She said she knew you, that you were a hero. I'm not a... I know, Daddy. You're just an engineer. Sophie smiled. But maybe you can be both. The partnership with MedSupply International came together faster than expected. Andrea was as sharp as Clara had warned, but she was also genuinely committed to the mission. Within a week, they had a framework for coordinated deployments, clean water and medical supplies delivered together. This changes everything, Clara said, reviewing the agreement. We can offer complete humanitarian packages, water, medical supplies, eventually maybe even educational resources. One step at a time, Ethan cautioned. We still have to deliver on Puerto Rico and Kenya. The manufacturing push was relentless. Ethan found himself sleeping in the Milwaukee facility, catching 3 hours on a cot in the break room between quality inspections. Zoe and James rotated shifts, ensuring someone was always monitoring production. On a particularly brutal Thursday, when they discovered a flaw in 50 units that required complete rebuilds, Harrison appeared unexpectedly. Came to gloat? Ethan asked, too tired for politeness. Came to help. Harrison set down a bag of sandwiches and coffee. I may think your humanitarian division is professionally risky, but I'm not an ass. Well, not completely. Tell me what needs doing. With Harrison's help, they salvaged the flawed units, his perfectionist attention to detail, catching problems before they became disasters. By dawn, they were back on schedule. Why? Ethan asked as they shared the last coffee. Because you were right, Harrison admitted. In the presentation to the board, about looking at grandchildren and knowing you helped. I don't have grandchildren yet, but someday, I'd like to tell them I was part of this. The Puerto Rico shipment left on schedule 100 units packed into shipping containers that looked impossibly small for the hope they carried. Ethan watched the trucks leave, exhaustion and pride warring in his chest. You did it, Clara said, appearing beside him. We did it. No, Ethan, this was you. Your determination, your standards, your refusal to compromise on quality. The team followed your lead. His phone rang before he could respond. Dr. Santos calling from Puerto Rico. Ethan, we have a problem. His stomach dropped. The units... No, they're perfect. But we have a situation. There's a community in the mountains completely cut off by mudslides. They've been without clean water for 3 weeks. Children are dying. Can you come... He looked at Clara, who was already pulling up flight schedules on her phone. We can be there tomorrow. Ethan, it's dangerous. The military won't even fly there. We'd have to go in by helicopter, and even that's risky. I'll be there. That night he sat with Sophie, explaining why he had to leave again. She listened solemnly, then went to her room and returned with her favorite stuffed animal, a worn bear named Mr. Buttons that Sarah had given her. Take him with you, she said, for luck. And so you remember to come home. Baby, I can't take Mr. Buttons. He'll protect you. Mommy said he was magic. Ethan pulled her close, breathing in her strawberry shampoo scent. I'll be careful. I promise. I know, you're always careful. But take him anyway. The flight to Puerto Rico was turbulent storms surrounding the island like angry guardians. Clara had insisted on coming, bringing James and a medical team from Andrea's company. The helicopter pilot who met them at the small airport looked skeptical. The winds are bad, he said in accented English. Very dangerous. People are dying, Ethan replied. We go. The flight into the mountains was terrifying. The helicopter bucked and dropped in the wind rain, lashing the windows so hard they couldn't see.
James turned green, clutching his seat. Even Clara looked pale. But Ethan held Mr. Buttons in his pocket and thought of Sophie's faith in him. They landed in a clearing that was more mud than ground. The community leader, a man named Miguel, met them with tears streaming down his weathered face. "Thank God you came. The children. We've lost 3 already." The situation was worse than reported. The mudslide had contaminated their only water source with bacteria and debris. People were drinking it anyway, desperate enough to risk the illness that followed. "We need to set up immediately," Ethan said, unloading equipment in the rain. "James, find the cleanest source point. Clara, coordinate with the medical team. We need to treat the sick while we get the water running." They worked through the night rain, turning the ground into a swamp that tried to swallow their equipment. The system fought them, connections failing in the moisture, the generator struggling in the thin mountain air. But by dawn, they had it running. The first clean water flowed as the sun broke through the clouds, and the sound the community made part sob, part celebration would haunt Ethan forever. Children lined up with containers supervised by the medical team, who ensured the sickest drank first. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, approached Ethan with a cup of the clean water. She said something in Spanish, and Miguel translated. "She says thank you for bringing the rain machine. She wants to share her water with you." Ethan knelt in the mud, accepting the cup with hands that shook. The water was perfectly clear, cold, safe. He took a sip, then handed it back to her. "Tell her it's her water. She should drink it all." The girl smiled, a brilliant expression that cut through exhaustion and fear and the weight of responsibility. This was why they did it. Not for recognition or profit, but for that smile, for the chance to give children the childhood they deserved. They stayed 3 more days, ensuring the system was stable and training locals on maintenance. The medical team treated dozens of patients, many who would have died without intervention. When the helicopter finally lifted them out, the entire community gathered to wave goodbye their faces. No longer desperate, but hopeful. On the flight home, Clara worked on her laptop documenting the deployment for the board. James slept exhausted from his first field experience. But Ethan held Mr. Buttons and stared out the window, thinking about all the communities still waiting, still dying for want of something as basic as clean water. "You're thinking about the next one," Clara said, not looking up from her screen. "Kenya. The situation there is even worse. We'll help them too, all of them eventually. It's not enough. We're moving too slow." Clara closed her laptop, studying him. "You can't save everyone, Ethan. But I have to try." "Yes," she said softly. "You do. It's what makes you who you are. Just don't lose yourself in the saving. Sophie needs her father, not just a hero who visits between deployments." Chicago looked impossibly clean and organized after the mountains of Puerto Rico. Sophie was waiting at the airport again, this time with a sign she'd made, "Welcome home, water hero." She crashed into his arms and he held her like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. "Did Mr. Buttons help?" she asked. "He was perfect, kept me safe the whole time." That evening, as Sophie showed him the perfect score on her science test and the new books she'd gotten from the library, Ethan felt the weight of his double life. In one world, he was daddy helping with homework and reading bedtime stories. In another, he was the water engineer making impossible decisions about which communities to help first. "You're sad," Sophie observed as he tucked her in. "Not sad, just thinking. About the kids who need help." "Yeah." She sat up, her expression serious beyond her years. "Mommy used to say that we can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone. Maybe if you teach other people to do what you do, more kids can get clean water." Ethan stared at his 7-year-old daughter, wondering when she'd become so wise. That's actually brilliant, baby." "I know," she said matter-of-factly. "I'm very smart. You said so." The next morning, he presented Sophie's idea to Clara and the team, a training program teaching local engineers in affected regions to build and maintain simplified versions of their systems. "It's scalable, Sus," Zoe said excitedly. "We could exponentially increase our reach." "We'd need educational materials translated into multiple languages," James added. "And partnerships with local universities," Clara mused. "But it could work." "Ethan, we start with Kenya. Build a training center alongside the water deployment. Create a model we can replicate." "That's a massive undertaking."
So is pulling you from a burning car. Sometimes the impossible is just what needs doing. Clara smiled, that rare expression that transformed her face. When did you become philosophical? When my 7-year-old started out thinking my entire engineering team. The Kenya deployment was scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving them time to develop the training program. Ethan threw himself into creating simple visual guides that could transcend language barriers. Sophie helped drawing pictures to illustrate concepts her childish art, somehow perfect for conveying complex ideas simply. One evening, Andrea Patterson visited their apartment ostensibly to discuss the medical supply coordination, but really to see the man behind the reputation in his natural environment. "This is where the magic happens," she asked, looking at their modest living room covered in drawings and technical specifications. "This is where the ideas start," Ethan corrected. "The magic happens when communities get clean water." Andrea watched Sophie carefully coloring a diagram about bacterial filtration, her concentration absolute. "She's remarkable. She gets it from her mother. I think she gets more from you than you realize." Andrea pulled out a folder. "I have a proposition. Med Supply wants to fund 10 full scholarships for your training program. Cover travel materials, everything for local engineers." "Why?" "Because water and health are inseparable. Because your success is our success. And because," she paused, "because my daughter is Sophie's age. I look at her and think about children who aren't as lucky. This is how I help." The partnership deepened, Andrea becoming a regular presence at planning meetings. She and Clara developed an unexpected friendship, two powerful women who understood the burden of leadership. Sophie adopted Andrea as an unofficial aunt, someone who brought her science books and listened to her elaborate theories about everything. 2 weeks before Kenya, Ethan's past life intersected unexpectedly with his present. He was leaving Caldwell Tower when Marcus Thompson, his old supervisor from the janitorial company, appeared. "Ethan, Jesus, is that really you?" Marcus looked older, grayer, his bulk reduced by what looked like illness or hard times. Ethan felt a complicated mix of emotions: resentment for the years of dismissive treatment, pity for the man's obvious decline, and an unexpected gratitude. Without those nights pushing a mop, he might never have saved Clara, never found this path. "Hello, Marcus. I heard. Someone said you worked here now, as an engineer. Technical Director of Humanitarian Services." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "From janitor to director. Guess you were slumming it with us." "I was surviving. There's a difference." "Yeah, well, some of us are still just surviving." Marcus started to walk away, then turned back. "That night when you fixed the prototype, I knew it was you. Saw it on the security footage before they did. Could have reported you gotten you fired." "Why didn't you?" "Because I saw something in your eyes when you looked at those machines. Same thing I used to see in the mirror before life beat it out of me. Hunger. Not for money or position, but to be more than what the world decided you were." He shrugged. "Figured you deserved a chance to feed that hunger." "Marcus, don't. I don't need your pity or your success story. Just do good with it, yeah. Some of us never get out of the basement. Make it count for those who do." He walked away before Ethan could respond, disappearing into the evening crowd. Ethan stood there for a long moment thinking about paths taken, and not taken about the thin line between pushing a mop and changing the world. That night, he found Clara still in her office, the city lights creating a constellation around her silhouette. "Working late again?" he asked. "Finalizing the Kenya logistics. We have a problem. The local government wants to tax our equipment as commercial imports. It'll eat 30% of our budget. Then we go around them, ship to the NGO, directly classify it as educational materials for the training program." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's borderline illegal. That's creative problem solving. Those kids need water more than the government needs tax revenue." "When did you become ruthless?" "When I realized being nice doesn't always save lives." She turned to face him fully, something unreadable in her expression. "You've changed since that day on the highway." "We both have." "Yes?" she said softly. "We have." There was a moment, brief but weighted, where the air between them shifted. Then Clara's phone rang, breaking whatever spell had been building. She answered immediately, shifting into CEO mode, and Ethan excused himself, confused by the sudden tension. At home, Sophie was asleep on the couch. Her Kenya research spread across the coffee table. She'd drawn maps, written facts about water scarcity, created a presentation that was probably more thorough than some of his engineers' work. He covered her with a blanket, careful not to disturb her papers. His phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "Thank you for being who you are. The world needs more Ethan Coles." He didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. Instead, he sat watching his daughter sleep, thinking about the children in Kenya who might soon have the same peaceful rest, the same chance at dreams that weren't haunted by thirst. The final week before Kenya passed in a blur of preparations. The training materials were translated into Swahili and Kikuyu, the equipment shipped and tracked obsessively. James had recruited 2 other young engineers, eager graduates, who saw this as more than a job. "We're building a movement," he told them at the final briefing. "Every engineer we train can train others. It's exponential impact." "Exponential hope," Zoe corrected. "That's what we're really delivering." The night before departure, Ethan took Sophie to their favorite restaurant. Mr. Antonelli made a special dessert, a cake with "Good luck in Kenya," written in chocolate. "How long this time?" Sophie asked, picking at her pasta. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "Will it be dangerous?" He wanted to lie to promise absolute safety, but Sophie deserved truth. "A little, but I'll be careful and I'll have a good team with me. Take Mr. Buttons again. Baby, you need him here. I have you most of the time. Those kids have nobody. Mr. Buttons should help them too." How did a 7-year-old understand sacrifice better than most adults? Ethan reached across the table, taking her small hand in his. "Your mom would be so proud of who you're becoming. She's proud of you too, Daddy. I know it." That night after Sophie was asleep, Ethan stood on his balcony looking at the stars barely visible through Chicago's light pollution. Somewhere on the other side of the world, children were looking at the same stars, hoping for salvation that might come in the form of an engineer from Chicago who'd once thought his life was over. His phone rang. Clara again. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking about tomorrow." "It's going to work, Ethan. The training program, the deployment, all of it. How can you be so sure? Because you don't know how to fail when it matters. It's your superpower. If you say just an engineer one more time, I'm cutting your salary," she interrupted, but he could hear the smile in her voice. "You're exactly who you're supposed to be, Ethan Cole. Stop doubting it." After they hung up, Ethan went inside and pulled out his notebook. Not the expensive one Clara had given him, but his old one filled with ideas from his janitor days. On a blank page, he wrote, "For Sophie and Sarah, for every child who deserves clean water, for every parent who wants to give their children better, for the man I used to be and the one I'm becoming. This is why we do it." Tomorrow, he would fly to Kenya. He would train engineers, install systems, save lives. But tonight, he was just a father in Chicago, holding his daughter's stuffed bear, preparing to change a small piece of the world. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like wings. The Nairobi airport hit them with a wall of heat that made Chicago's worst summer day feel like spring. Ethan stood on the tarmac watching the equipment being unloaded, Mr. Buttons tucked safely in his backpack. Clara was already on her phone coordinating with the local NGO, while James and the 2 new engineers, Sarah Kim and David Okonkwo, looked around with the wide eyes of people experiencing Africa for the first time. "It's different than I expected," Sarah Kim said, and Ethan understood. The airport was modern, bustling with business travelers and tourists, nothing like the poverty-stricken images that dominated American media. "Kenya's complicated," David replied. He'd been born here, moved to America at 12, and this was his first time back. Beautiful and broken, modern and ancient all at once. Their convoy traveled north from Nairobi, the landscape changing from urban sprawl to rural villages over the course of 4 hours. The roads deteriorated with each mile until they were bouncing over dirt tracks that seemed determined to shake their teeth loose. Through it all, Clara never stopped working, her laptop balanced on her knees, negotiating supplies and permissions with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign. The training center was nothing more than a concrete building with a corrugated metal roof, but the local engineers who'd gathered there looked at it like it was MIT.
23 men and women ages ranging from early 20s to late 50s, all with some technical training but limited resources to apply it. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan began with David translating into Swahili. You're not here to learn how to install water systems. You're here to learn how to save your communities. The first day was theory, water contamination, filtration principles, the science behind their system. But Ethan could see the restlessness in their eyes. These weren't people who learned from PowerPoints. They learned from doing. Forget the slides, he announced after lunch. Let's build something. They spent the afternoon assembling a system from scratch, everyone getting their hands dirty. An older engineer named Joseph, who'd been skeptical from the start, suddenly understood when he saw how the UV array worked. This is so simple, he said in accented English. Why hasn't anyone done this before? Because simple doesn't make money, Clara answered from the doorway. She'd been observing quietly, but now she joined them kneeling beside the prototype. Complex systems require expensive maintenance replacement parts, foreign technicians. Our goal is to make ourselves unnecessary. That evening, they ate dinner with the local community ugali, and sukuma wiki served on shared plates. The village elder, a woman named Grace, who carried herself like royalty despite her patched clothing, sat beside Ethan. Your daughter, she said, having somehow learned about Sophie. You left her to come here. She understands why I'm here. Does she, or does she simply accept it because children accept what they must? Grace's eyes were kind but piercing. I had a husband who saved everyone but his family. By the time he realized his mistake, his children no longer knew him. The words haunted Ethan that night as he lay on a thin mattress listening to the sounds of the Kenyan night insects and distant animals and the wind through acacia trees. He pulled out his satellite phone and called Sophie, even though it was expensive and the connection was terrible. Daddy, her voice crackled through static. How's Kenya? Beautiful. Complicated. I'm teaching people to build the water systems, so they can help even after you leave. Exactly. That's smart. Like when Ms. Chen taught me to make dumplings. Now I can make them myself when I miss you. His throat tightened. Do you miss me a lot, baby? Sometimes, but I know you're doing important things. Mrs. Chen says you're changing the world. Sophie, if you could choose, would you want me to come home to just be a regular dad with a regular job? The line was quiet for so long he thought they'd lost connection. Then, in a small voice, I want you to be happy, Daddy. You're happy when you're helping people, so I want you to keep helping, but maybe sometimes I could come too when I don't have school. I'd like that, baby. I'd like that a lot. The next days fell into a rhythm. Morning instruction, afternoon construction, evening installations in nearby villages. Each successful system was celebrated with singing and dancing that made Ethan uncomfortable and proud in equal measure. The trainees were learning fast, already suggesting improvements and adaptations for local conditions. But it was the fourth village that changed everything. They arrived to find chaos. A cholera outbreak had struck 2 days earlier. Children lay on makeshift cots, their bodies ravaged by dehydration. The medical team Andrea had insisted on sending sprang into action, but they needed clean water desperately for rehydration salts. How fast can we get a system running? Clara asked. Her CEO composure cracking at the sight of an infant barely breathing in her mother's arms. 2 hours if we skip safety protocols, Ethan replied. Then skip them. They worked in organized frenzy. The trainees jumped in without being asked their newfound skills suddenly urgently necessary. Joseph took charge of the UV array, his skepticism replaced by determination. Sarah Kim and David managed the filtration assembly while James handled the power connection with borrowed car batteries. 90 minutes later, clean water was flowing. The medical team immediately began preparing rehydration solutions. Within hours, children who'd been dying were sitting up sipping the life-saving mixture. The infant Clara had noticed was crying the most beautiful sound Ethan had ever heard because it meant she had the strength to cry. This is why, Clara said quietly, standing beside him as they watched the medical team work. This is why we push so hard. It's not enough. We saved this village, but how many others are suffering right now? You can't carry the whole world, Ethan. Watch me try.
That night, the village celebrated their survival with a ceremony that honored the water team. Ethan was given a name in the local dialect that meant bringer of rivers. Clara received a hand-woven bracelet from the mother of the infant. She'd noticed tears streaming down both women's faces as it was tied around Clara's wrist. "We need to accelerate," Clara said later as they sat outside under stars so bright they seemed fake to city dwellers. "The board approved 50 million. I'm going to push for 100. They'll never approve that. Then I'll use my own money. I have more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What's the point of wealth if children are dying for want of clean water?" Something in her voice made Ethan look at her. Really look at her. In the starlight, without her CEO armor of makeup and designer clothes, she looked vulnerable, almost fragile. "Why does this matter so much to you?" he asked, really underneath everything. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "My father died trying to help people. Heart attack from overwork, stress, pushing too hard to build bridges that would connect communities. I spent 20 years building a company to honor him, but somewhere along the way I forgot the helping people part, got lost in stock prices and market share." She turned to him. "You reminded me why he did it, why it mattered. That day on the highway, you didn't save just my life, you saved my purpose." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then David appeared, breaking the spell, reporting that another village had heard about their work and was requesting help. The training program's second week brought unexpected challenges. A local government official arrived demanding permits. They didn't have payments they wouldn't make. Clara handled him with a combination of charm and steel that left him somehow happy to approve their work without bribes. "How did you do that?" James asked, awed. "I reminded him that his children drink the same water as everyone else's," Clara replied simply. The trainees were becoming teachers themselves, showing newer arrivals the techniques they'd mastered. Joseph had become Ethan's unofficial assistant, his natural leadership and newfound expertise making him the perfect candidate to run the program after they left. "You could do this," Ethan told him one evening as they calibrated a UV array. "Lead the training program for all of East Africa." "I'm just a village engineer. I don't have degrees from American universities." "Neither did I when I started. I was a janitor who got lucky." Joseph looked at him skeptically. "You were never just anything, Mr. Ethan. I can see it in how you work. You were always an engineer. Life just took a detour." On day 10, Sophie called with news that made Ethan's heart stop. "Daddy, I won the district science fair. I'm going to state." "That's amazing, baby. When is it?" "Next month, May 15th. You'll be back, right?" He did quick mental math. They were scheduled to return May 10th, but if anything went wrong, "I'll be there, I promise." "Pinky promise?" "Pinky promise." Clara, who'd been reviewing supply manifests nearby, looked up. "We'll make sure you're back, whatever it takes." But the universe had other plans. A massive storm system moved in the next day, washing out roads and making travel impossible. They were trapped in the village with limited supplies and 3 more communities desperately waiting for installations. "We could try the northern route," David suggested, studying weather-stained maps. "That's controlled by militants," Joseph said quietly. "Very dangerous for foreigners." "How dangerous?" Ethan asked. "They might let you pass for a fee, or they might take you hostage. Or worse," Clara stood up decisively. "We're not risking it. The communities will have to wait until the road's clear." "Children are dying," Ethan protested, "and you have a child who needs her father alive." Her tone brooked no argument. "We wait." The forced delay turned into an unexpected opportunity. With nowhere to go, the training became intensive, almost intimate. Ethan worked with each trainee individually, understanding their strengths and challenges. Sarah Kim developed a pictographic instruction manual that transcended language barriers. James created a troubleshooting guide based on every problem they'd encountered. On the third night of the storm, the village's existing well failed. Contaminated runoff had overwhelmed it, leaving 300 people without any water source. Their emergency supplies wouldn't last 24 hours. "We need to modify one of the systems," Ethan announced at an emergency meeting. "Create a high-capacity unit that can serve the entire village." "That's never been done," James said. "The flow rates." "Then we innovate. That's what engineers do." They worked through the night, the trainees and the team becoming a single unit focused on survival. Joseph suggested a parallel processing approach that Ethan hadn't considered. Sarah Kim figured out how to boost the UV intensity without burning out the arrays. David salvaged parts from broken generators to increase pump capacity. By dawn, they had something that shouldn't work, but did a Frankenstein's monster of engineering that produced clean water at 3 times the normal rate. "We need to document this," Clara said, exhausted but exhilarated. "This could change how we approach community-wide installations." "Later, Ethan replied, watching villagers fill containers with clean water. "Right now, we just need to keep people alive." The storm passed after 5 days, leaving behind mud and destruction, but also something else, a proven team of local engineers who'd innovated under pressure and succeeded. Joseph stood taller, spoke with new authority. The other trainees looked at themselves differently. No longer students, but engineers who'd saved their community. "This is your graduation," Ethan told them. "You're ready." The final installations went smoothly, the trainees taking the lead while Ethan observed. In one village, they encountered a problem he hadn't seen before: arsenic contamination from natural deposits. Joseph immediately started sketching modifications, pulling 2 other trainees into his planning. "We need an additional filtration stage," he explained to Ethan. "Here before the primary filter. It will slow the flow rate but remove the arsenic." It was exactly what Ethan would have suggested, but he hadn't needed to. The student had become the teacher. Their last night in Kenya, the communities threw a celebration that drew people from miles around. There was music and dancing food that represented precious resources shared freely. Children performed a play about the water wizards who brought clean rivers, with a character who was clearly supposed to be Ethan glasses made of wire, a concerned expression constantly checking calculations on a piece of bark. "Is that really what I look like?" he asked Clara, who was trying not to laugh. "The anxiety is spot on," she confirmed, "but they missed your tendency to forget to eat when you're focused." Grace the elder, who'd warned him about saving everyone but his family, approached as the celebration continued around them. "You did well," she said simply. "But more than the water, you gave us knowledge. That lasts longer than any machine." "Joseph and the others, they'll continue the work." "Yes, but you, Mr. Ethan, what will you continue, the saving or the living?" Before he could answer, she pressed something into his hand, a small carved figure of a man carrying water, the details intricate despite its tiny size. "For your daughter. Tell her it's her father bringing life to the world. But remind her too that even water bringers need to rest to refill their own wells." The flight home was subdued, everyone exhausted from 3 weeks of intensive work. Clara worked on her laptop, preparing the board presentation that would request doubled funding. James slept across 3 seats, snoring softly. Sarah Kim and David were deep in discussion about modifications for different contamination types. But Ethan stared out the window at the Atlantic passing below, thinking about Grace's words. In his backpack, Mr. Button sat next to the carved figure, 2 talismans of the life he was trying to balance. His phone, finally back in range, exploded with messages. Most were routine, but one made him sit up straight. From Sophie's teacher, urgent. "Please call about Sophie." His hands shook as he dialed scenarios racing through his mind. Illness, accident. The phone rang once, twice. "Mr. Cole." "Thank you for calling back. Sophie's fine," Mrs. Peterson said quickly, and Ethan could breathe again. "But there's been an incident. She got into a fight. A fight Sophie's never... A boy was bullying another student, saying his family was poor, that his father was just a garbage man. Sophie apparently told him that all jobs have dignity, and when he laughed, she punched him." Despite everything, Ethan felt a surge of pride. "Is she suspended?" "No, the principal understood the circumstances. But Mr. Cole, Sophie's been struggling since you left. Her grades are still excellent, but she's withdrawn spending recess alone. I think she's carrying more weight than a 7-year-old should. I'll be home tomorrow. I'll talk to her. She's proud of you, Mr. Cole. Maybe too proud. She feels she has to be perfect because you're off being a hero. That's a heavy burden for a child." The words echoed Grace's warning, and Ethan felt the weight of his choices settling on his shoulders. He found Clara watching him, having overheard enough to understand. "Sophie," she asked, "she's been hiding how hard this is for her." Kids do that. They protect us even when we're supposed to protect them. Clara's voice carried experience he hadn't expected. I did the same thing with my mother after my father died. Pretended I was fine so she wouldn't worry. Were you fine? No, I was drowning, but I got very good at looking like I was swimming. The landing in Chicago felt like returning to another planet. The organized chaos of O'Hare, the climate-controlled comfort, the assumption of safety and clean water, it all felt surreal after Kenya. Sophie was waiting with Mrs. Chen holding a sign that said, "Welcome home, Water Wizard," with a drawing that was clearly inspired by the pictures he'd sent of the play. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and when she hugged him, she held on longer than usual, like she was afraid he might disappear. "I missed you so much, Daddy," she whispered into his shirt. "I missed you too, baby, every single day." That evening, after Mrs. Chen had gone home and they'd eaten dinner. Thai food. Sophie's choice. Ethan sat his daughter down for the conversation he'd been dreading and planning in equal measure. "Mrs. Peterson told me about the fight." Sophie's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I know fighting is wrong, but he was being so mean to Marcus and nobody was doing anything, and I just got so angry." Hey, it's okay." He pulled her into his lap, feeling how much she'd grown in just 3 weeks. "I'm not mad. But Sophie, why didn't you tell me you were having a hard time?" "Because you're doing important things, saving people. My problems are small." "Your problems are never small to me. You're the most important person in my world. More important than the kids who need water." The question was so earnest, so genuinely confused, that it broke Ethan's heart. How had he let it get to this point? "Different, important," he said carefully. "Those kids need help, and I can provide it."
But you need a father, and I'm the only one who can be that. I've been doing the first job well, but the second one, not so much.
"You're a good daddy," Sophie protested. "I'm trying to be. But I think I need to try differently." He set her down, looking her in the eyes. "What if I promise that for every trip I take, we do something special when I get back? Just you and me." "Like what?" "Whatever you want. Museum, zoo, Cubs game, building rockets in the park. Can we build a water filter? A real one for my state science fair project." He laughed, the tension breaking. "That's your idea of fun." "It's fun if we do it together." They spent the weekend in the lab at Caldwell with Clara's permission. Sophie wore safety goggles that kept sliding down her nose and latex gloves that went up to her elbows. Together they built a tabletop water purification system, Ethan teaching and Sophie learning with the focused intensity she brought to everything she cared about.
"Can we make it pretty, but?" she asked after the functional components were complete. "Science should be beautiful too." So they painted the housing blue with silver stars, added LED lights that made the water glow, created something that was both functional and magical art and engineering combined. "It's perfect," Sophie declared, then paused. "Daddy, do you think Mommy would like it?" "She would love it. She'd love how smart and creative and kind you are." I remember her a little. She smelled like flowers and always sang when she cooked. She did. She sang badly but with enthusiasm. Sophie giggled. "Like how you dance." "Exactly like how I dance." Monday brought meetings and reports, the corporate side of changing the world. The board was impressed by the Kenya success, especially the training program's potential for scaling. They approved the additional funding, but with conditions: more oversight, more metrics, more accountability. "They want to turn it into a business," Ethan complained to Clara after the meeting. "Everything's a business at this scale, but that doesn't mean it can't also be a mission." She studied him across her desk. "You look tired." Sophie's teacher was right. I've been trying to save the world but losing my daughter in the process. So find a balance. How? Every day I'm here, kids are dying from preventable waterborne diseases. How do I choose between Sophie's school play and a village that needs help? Clara was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. It was a young girl, maybe 12, in a hospital bed. "My daughter," Clara said quietly. "The one I gave up for adoption when I was 19. Before I built this company, before I became who I am, I thought I was doing the right thing, giving her a better life with a family that was ready. But I think about her every day. Wonder if she needed me specifically, not just any mother."
Ethan stared at the photo, this revelation reshaping his understanding of Clara completely. Does she know about you? No, the adoption was closed, but I keep tabs, make sure she's okay. She's brilliant, wants to be a doctor, has a good family who loves her, but sometimes I wonder if I chose saving myself over raising her, and which decision would have led to more good in the world. Clara, my point is there's no perfect answer, but Sophie is here now needing you. The villages will still need help next month, next year, but Sophie won't be 7 forever. Don't miss it. That afternoon, Ethan met with Joseph via video call. The Kenyan engineer was at a new village teaching another group of locals the water system installation. How's it going? Ethan asked. Very well. We've installed 3 more systems since you left. The modified design for arsenic contamination is working perfectly. Any problems? Only good ones. More villages requesting help than we can handle immediately, but we're training more engineers. The knowledge is spreading. This was what Sophie had understood: teach others, multiply the impact. Ethan didn't have to personally save everyone if he could enable others to save their own communities. Joseph, I want to offer you something. Official position as East Africa Training Director. Salary Resources Authority to expand the program. Joseph's eyes widened. You trust me with this. I trust you to do it better than I could. You understand the local needs, the culture, the challenges I can only guess at. Then yes. Yes, absolutely. After the call, Ethan found Zoe in the lab working on improvements to the UV array efficiency. I need your help, he said. I need to restructure how we work. More delegation, more remote management. I can't keep leaving Sophie for weeks at a time. About time you figured that out, Zoe replied without looking up. I've already drafted a proposal. Regional directors for each area with you overseeing remotely and visiting quarterly for quality control and training updates. You've been thinking about this. Ethan, everyone can see you're burning out trying to be everywhere at once. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. She finally looked at him. Plus, Sophie's awesome. She deserves her dad present, not just physically, but mentally. The restructuring took a month to implement. Clara backed it fully, even suggested additions of virtual training platform where engineers worldwide could share innovations, a supply chain system that could deliver equipment without Ethan's personal oversight, a network of local leaders like Joseph, who could adapt the technology to regional needs. During that month, Ethan kept his promise to Sophie. Every evening, no matter what crisis arose, he was home by 6. They worked on her science fair project, refining the beautiful water filter until it was both art and engineering. They read books together, went to movies, had pizza nights where they competed to see who could catch thrown peanuts in their mouth. Sophie always won.